morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here today. The present webinar will be focused on the impact on Asian countries of CBAM. Before to start, I want to mention really briefly the rules of today. So please come open, your microphone possibly off, please. And then if there are any questions, you can share with us in our chat. And also raise your hand if you have some questions. This is the agenda of today's meeting. So I start by welcome and giving you an introduction of today's webinar. Before of that, I want to explain to you really briefly what Tesi per il Clima is. So Tesi per il Clima is a non-profit initiative by Equilibria, which aims to encourage and promote the best thesis on climate change by providing a small contribution and financial support to those who haven't chosen to work through building a better and low carbon future. We can say that this is our slogan for Thesis per il Clima, our claim. And I would like also to underline that in this webinar, we aim to celebrate the master thesis that won the call for proposal established with the University of Turin and written by Luca Sardo. Then I will also introduce to you Luca and his thesis. I also would like to underline that this webinar is officially part of Sustainable Development Festival 2025, promoted by ASVIS, which gives the opportunity to share culture according also to the United Nations 2030 Agenda and the 17 Development Sustainable Goals. So this is our small contribution to steer Italy and also the world into a path of sustainable development. Coming back in the agenda, the moment I will pass you to Daniele, that will give us, a brief introduction to the webinar and the topic of today. Then we will have the pleasure to listen to Lucia Granini, head of the organization sustainability area in Equilibrium, who will give us a brief presentation on CBAM regulation. And then we will pass the word to Luca Sardo, as I mentioned, the winner of Tesi per il Clima Awards. Luca is a young researcher who has studied in Australia, in Sydney, where he studied CBAM, then carried forward in his thesis. So today, also with his insight, we will analyze the impact of CBAM countries at risk and proposal on how to adjust it to make CBAM a fairer mechanism. We will have also the opportunity to share questions and answer, and then there will be the conclusion of webinar. So for now, thank you for attention.
Okay, thank you, Lavinia. Please confirm me if it's in the right position, right mode, the presentation. Okay, thank you. Yes, so we thought to organize this webinar because CBAM is really an important topic, and you know, it's quite interesting that all the time we have an international meeting, you know, could be ISO, CCC, or other important context. When somebody mentions CBAM, everybody, you know, rise the level of attention because it's really an important tool for the European policy, but not only. But before to go in some more details on CBAM, let me only introduce Equilibria for who doesn't know our company. We are a consulting and training company that is focused mainly on carbon management, but our payoff is evolving sustainable perspectives, because we believe that sustainability is not something that you can achieve. It's something, it's part of the pathway, it's a movement. It's something that you need to always looking for. And for this reason, we believe that the understanding of the evolution of the legislative framework, the environmental framework, and the business framework is fundamental in order to identify the best direction for sustainability. And we try to make in practice this concept through several informative initiative. We have one format is a Tea Corner. Maybe the majority of you maybe already know it. Tea Corner is a 30 minutes meeting every month, always at 5 o'clock, like the time for the tea. And we have opportunity to discuss a topic completely different, the social environmental area, but it's more a kind of feed for the brain. Some way to open your mind, not to go in deep, but to enlarge your general understanding. The seminar is the other format. The seminar is more vertical, where you analyze it in detail with consultancy, verification bodies, companies, some specific tool already available or under development that are relevant for sustainability and carbon management in particular. And finally, we have other workshop or webinar like this one, where we want to focus on specific aspects. And I don't want to introduce myself too long, but I think that this point is very important in this concept, in this meeting. Because I'm also coordinating some ISO working group, but in this case, to be the chair of the Chain Technical Committee on Climate Change is fundamental, because with this technical committee, we had a lot of opportunity to discuss with the colleagues of the European Commission on the CBAM, when it was under preparation and even when it was already published. And there are some important topics that we tried to influence, but we were not successful. But this is another point. For example, the use of ISO standard, because we believe that ISO standard should be the best way to help not European companies to quantify their greenhouse gas emission. But we will see later with the intervention of Lucia that CBAM was developed in the direction with the idea of a kind of expansion of a EU ETS. And this is absolutely right for the perspective of Europe. But today we want to discuss what is the perception outside of Europe. And another important point, for example, that we discuss as a chain with the European Commission is the verification. The verification and accreditation in this moment of CBAM is required under the EU ETS umbrella. So it means that you have a company in Korea, for example, they need to quantify verify their emission, greenhouse gas emission, in order to be eligible for CBAM. They need to work in connection with some European company or European context. It's fully understandable from the perspective of Europe, because Europe wants to have a strong control of the tool, but maybe it's not understandable at the same level for the Korean companies, the Korean system. So it is part of the discussion that maybe we can also continue during the question and answer part of the meeting. Obviously, my point is very, very short introduction, but we need to start from here. So we are fully aware that the Green Deal is the framework where CBAM shall be considered. So European Commission, European Union is fully committed to achieve net zero by 2050, but not only net zero, only with brackets, by 2050, but also minus 55% for tomorrow morning, for Monday morning, because 2030 is Monday morning for the companies. So this is a very clear context that is pushing a lot the European system. And the main actor, the most important tool for the European Commission on climate change is for sure ETS. We see the 4 different phases of ETS. It's interesting to note that the first one was started in 2005 but was published in 2003. In 2003, the Kyoto Protocol was not ratified at international level yet. So we were in a context where the European Commission moved the first step before the Kyoto Protocol was in place, was fully applicable. It's only to show that the strong commitment of European Commission in this direction. At the same time, this creates some difficulties for the company, and for sure later Lucia will explain more about the carbon leakage. And this is exactly the point where CBAM enter, because we want to have a strong commitment for European context, European companies, for example, but at the same time, European companies are in the international context. And the international context is exactly where CBAM land, because it's impossible to say we are the best one and everything is going very well, but then you are not part of the system. It's not working. So to work to be effective, you need to be committed in your area, but also to manage the interface on what is happening outside Europe. And this is very critical because it's the message to push other countries to go in the same direction. At the same time, try to protect, let me use protect, maybe it's not the right word, but to give value to the European company on what they are doing in comparison with what is happening outside Europe, where you can have a different condition. You can have one country fully committed on climate change, or maybe another country that is not committed at all. So this kind of variation, differentiation, biodiversity in terms of commitment, let me say, is the key point. And today, we want to see how this system that was developed and thought within the European Union territory is perceived outside, and which kind of implication can have from outside companies and outside country and organization. So it is my very short presentation only to focus on the expectation for this meeting, not to have an initial explanation of what CBAM is, and then to move from Europe, because we will see the tool from the Europe perspective with Lucia. With Luca, we will move from outside Europe. We look from outside how CBAM is. I think it's a very interesting opportunity for us to have a very open mind discussion in the final part of the presentation. So thank you, Lavinia, and the floor is to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniele. So I'll pass the word to Lucia.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. I'm Lucia Granini, and I'm the environmental consultant and head of the organization stability area in the Equilibria, and I have the pleasure to be the lead assessor for Accredia. It's our national accreditation body. And I have a little time to talk about the CBAM, but I try to say the main features of this regulation. And so the CBAM, this carbon border adjustment mechanism is an European regulation. I like the number, and I see that the number of this regulation is the 1926 of 2023, and it is important because introduce European Union border cost for these types of products, and there are very energy activities, because we talk about the cement, iron, steel, aluminium, fertilizer, electricity, and hydrogen. Some of these activities are in the ETS, European ETS, because there is a strict relation, as Daniele said, between CBAM and emission trading. But I go on, and we talk about what is this cost, how this cost is calculated, and the cost is calculated based on the carbon embedded in the products. But another element is important, the presence or absence of the carbon pricing or an emission trading system applied in the non-EU countries. So when we talk about the carbon embedded, we talk about the emissions, direct or indirect emissions. But to calculate this emission, we have the necessity to understand the primary data. Because then is a simple formula, but the elements, the important elements is to understand the primary data. That is, sorry, that is the data are the quantity of products that fall under the CBAM, but the fossil fuel consumption, such as natural gas, coal, fuel oil. So is a number that the company know because is our consumption in terms of fossil fuel. But we interesting about the raw materials whose carbon contact generates CO2 during the process. If you think about iron steel, you know that we have the emission combustion, but we have emission, the process emission, because we use some materials that have as a content of carbon and then generate CO2 in the atmosphere. And in this case, we talk about the data in connection with the direct emission, but we talk about the indirect emissions. So we have the necessity to know the consumption of the electricity, but electricity that we use to produce the code of the product under the CBAM. And then the last point is about the legislation such as carbon tax or emission trading. So this is the focus of the CBAM in the term of technical elements. Okay, and the difficulties of EU company is have this data from non-EU company. Okay, for several motivation, but is the focus to have the goal of this regulation. And another important point is that this data must be subjected to accredited third-party verification. And then the European company upload this data, okay, in the EU Commission portal. In this slide, I put a simple screenshot of the portal, but you know that European system have developed this central portal, and all the EU company introduce our data in this system. And the verify is a critical point, as Daniele said. And this is the timeline of the CBAM, because in this moment we are in the pilot phase, because EU company check the data with your supplier, no EU supplier, but in this moment the EU company don't have the cost because they only upload the data in the EU portal, but they don't have the cost. And in particular, we have not the verification of this data. So in this moment, we are free to insert one data or not a value because we are in the first phase. But from 2026, we start the CBAM, the first period, and in this case, we have the necessity that these data are verified from a third party accredited, and the EU company pay for in relation of the CO2 embedded emission in the products that they import from no EU company. So it is important that in this period we received the real data, because the next period is from a very few months. And so I go to the end of my presentation, because from this point, the CBAM is very important to push for adoption of carbon market globally. And in this moment, many countries are thinking about introducing carbon pricing, or such as China talk about extend their actual ETS, but the emission trading in China is in this moment for only energy activities, but they talk about to extend this system as to steel, iron, aluminium, that is activity under CBAM. So this is the very element, important element for our point of view, and in this way we have the possibility to push and to collect the data that are more actual data, and not only the default values to calculate the embedded emissions. Okay, so I stop my presentation and pass the...
Thank you, Lucia. Thank you for your speech. So before to pass you to Luca, I would like to underline that Luca is a young researcher that started his project in University of Technology in Australia, Sydney, and then he conducted research, in fact, in this topic, then carried forward in his thesis with a main focus on risks and impact of CBAM in Asian countries. So, Luca, if you are ready,
yes,
you can share your screen, and thank you. Off you go.
Okay. I hope my screen is visible. Hi, everyone, and very nice to be here and be able to speak to you all. As Lavinia was saying, my name is Luca Sardo. I've been working on and studying the effects of CBAM since 2023 due to my Erasmus project in Australia, where I was part of a focus group that started to analyze the impacts of CBAM on that country. And then I carried forward my study when I came back to Italy under the coordination of Silvana Dalmazzone, who is a professor at the University of Turin. And we've been working on, we extended the scope of our research, and we focused on the impacts of CBAM on the whole East Asia and Pacific region. Our idea was to focus on this region because there are many of the most important trading partners of the European Union, as well as most of the countries that are projected to suffer the highest impact from climate change in the future. So it was interesting for us to understand how CBAM will what impact it will have on their economies, as well as if the mechanism in general is compliant or could be compliant in the future with UN and IPCC regulation in terms of climate justice, or better, common but differentiated responsibilities principle. My research, like to give some context around my research, I will present a few concepts very briefly related to the literature review of carbon border adjustments, and with a focus on carbon leakage, as that was also mentioned by Daniele early on, as well as the threat of resource shuffling. And then I will discuss my research questions, explain the methodology, and present to you the results and some conclusions. I think you all will be aware of the concept of carbon leakage. I want just to give a brief overview, because of course carbon leakage is one of the main reasons why the EU Commission decided to work and implement the CBAM mechanism. And usually the main discussion around carbon leakage relates to the competition channel through which carbon leakage can happen, even though it's not the only channel that we should be aware of. Carbon leakage happens when they're like in a specific region of the world, in a specific country, or in this case, let's take, for example, the European Union, a new regulation, like a new environmental regulation is implemented. And this regulation, for example, the European Emission Trading Scheme, has a positive impact in terms of reducing CO2 emissions within the region. But some may argue that the emissions may actually increase in other regions of the world, because companies might decide just to shift the production of energy intensive and resource intensive products from the regulated region, Europe, to other regions of the world where these regulations are not in place. And CBAM tries to address this aspect of carbon leakage. And in the literature, we also see that carbon leakage can happen through other channels. The energy channel basically describes the effect through which when a region of the world, let's take Europe again, for example, decides to reduce the use of specific sources of energy, for example, fossil fuels, then of course the demand for these fossil fuels goes down, and the price of the fossil fuels goes down as well, since the demand is lower. And this effect may lead other countries to sometimes slow down their energy transition, because of course they have affordable and cheap energy sources like fossil fuels, when the price goes down, they might decide, okay, let's slow down the energy transition, since we have a cheap energy source. And so that's something that we should also keep in mind, and it's a less known and less studied effect of carbon leakage, but it's also important to consider it. On the other hand, we have a positive channel through which we can address carbon leakage, which is the innovation channel. And this phenomenon happens when, like, let's take European Union again, European companies have to comply with a stricter environmental regulation, and they have to come up with technologies and innovation in the production processes to reduce the environmental impact of their products. And then the technologies and the innovations that are developed in Europe can spread across the world through a spillover effect, and be implemented also by companies that work in other regions of the world where those regulations were not in place, but they can benefit from the innovation effect that happened in Europe. So that's one of the positive effects of the only positive channel through which carbon leakage can be addressed. And another problem that was discussed a lot with relations to the carbon border adjustment mechanism, as well as the emission trading scheme, is the problem of resource shuffling. The problem of resource shuffling was studied for the first time when California implemented their cap and trade system to reduce the CO2 intensity of the energy mix. And when the cap and trade system was implemented, there were a few researchers who studied how US energy producers, instead of actually changing their energy mix or their energy sources towards renewable sources, they were actually just shuffling the resources, so redirecting all the clean energy that they had towards California to comply with their cap and trade system, and then direct all the rest of the energy production towards other states in the US where those regulations were not in place. And in order to avoid this phenomenon of resource shuffling, it's always important to try to coordinate and align policies such as the CBAM with similar policies in other countries. UK and US are, or for example, the US were discussing the implementation of a similar policy. And so creating some sort of a climate club with similar policies in terms of carbon border adjustments might increase the efficiency of the policy and might prevent some companies from just deciding to send the clean products towards the regulated regions and the dirtier products towards the non-regulated regions. Now I would like to discuss a little bit the methodology that I used for the analysis that I'm presenting to you. The methodology comes from takes inspiration from previous studies, such as the paper by Overland and Sabirevkov that came out in 2022. And Overland and Sabirevkov tried to analyze the CBAM, tried to create a CBAM opposition index, which was a qualitative measure to understand which countries were more likely to oppose the introduction of CBAM in Europe, and therefore maybe take this discussion at the WTO level to basically say that this regulation was not compliant with WTO policies. And in their paper, they analyzed 5 subdimensions to create the CBAM opposition index. And we can see the results of their study, and they basically plotted all the countries that they were able to collect data for in a map to understand which one were more likely to oppose the CBAM introduction and which ones were less likely, to inform the European Union and try to basically implement aspects of the regulation that could benefit also other countries to avoid WTO litigations to take place. Another study that was really important for the development of my own was the paper by Eike and others that came out in 2021, where they tried to analyze the effect of the impact of the CBAM through a relative risk index that measured exposure and vulnerability. Exposure was measured through a variable that computed the exports as a proportion of the country GDP, and vulnerability was computed through 3 different variables that were monitoring the diversification of exports, the carbon intensity, and the statistical capacity. I tried to build on top of this study to include different areas of the world, but also different variables that were important from my perspective to understand the relative risk of the countries that I was studying. You can see here the results of the study by Eike in 2021, and you can see that, for example, some of the main trading partners of the EU were not considered in the study, for example, Japan and South Korea. So that's also one of the reasons why I tried to expand the knowledge around this topic. And in my comprehensive risk index, I kept the same distinction between exposure and vulnerability. And I tried to implement a few other variables that, from my perspective, were important to understand how dangerous the CBAM might be for an EU trading partner. The exposure is, of course, the CBAM exports as a proportion of each country's GDP. So we are considering only the exports related to the sectors that Lucia was describing before: steel, iron, aluminium, fertilizers, and so on. And for the vulnerability, I tried to I analyzed the diversification of exports, the carbon intensity of the energy mix, the statistical capacity, which is actually a really important variable because, as also some of the previous speakers anticipated, being able to compute the emissions that take place in the whole supply chain and the emissions that are embedded in each product is, of course, something that requires a very high level of statistical capacity in each country. And so being able to measure those emissions is something important to be able to comply with the CBAM regulation. And then I included the innovation capacity for each country, as well as the trade elasticity, which measures how trade flows change according to a change in the price of in the trade cost. And based out of these 6 subdimensions, I was able to compute the comprehensive risk index, which I'm showing you here. You can see on the left the list of countries with a relative risk index, and from the study, what the main results that I would like to show you are for Malaysia and Korea and Japan, since Malaysia and Korea are the countries where the relative risk index is higher, and Japan is the country where the relative risk index is lower. And all of them are like the risk is the main features that contributed to their risk level are different. For example, for Malaysia, the main factors were the reliance on the trading relationship with the EU, since EU is the 3rd largest trading partner for the country, as well as the very low share of renewable energy in their energy mix. As you can see, only 2% of the primary energy comes from renewable sources. With regards to Korea, we can see that EU is its largest trading partner. So the relationship with the EU and the commercial flows with the EU are really crucial for the country. And also there is a very low value of diversification, which means that most of the exports from Korea towards EU fall under the CBAM regulation. And for Japan, for example, instead we see that Japan has a low risk index because it has a very high innovation capacity, a very high statistical capacity, and the low value of trade exposure for the CBAM regulation. So in terms of the main conclusions of my work, I would like to mention the policy implications of the CBAM. So as you saw in the previous slide, decarbonization in Southeast Asian countries is a priority because Malaysia, but not only Malaysia, have a very low renewable energy production at the moment, and therefore being able to transition towards cleaner energy will allow them at first to reduce the CO2 emissions of their country, as well as to be able to be more competitive when the CBAM will be effectively implemented. And I would like to discuss also a few implications in terms of the CBAM extension. Keep in mind that, of course, this paper was I was working on it in 2023 and early 2024. So there's been a radical shift, I would say, in the discussion around climate regulations in the past years. So of course, some of the conclusions are different now, and I would like also to discuss that maybe with you or at the end of my presentation, because, for example, while I was working on the paper, there were discussions about extending the CBAM regulation to all the ETS sectors, not only the 7 sectors that we discussed before. And therefore, so if this extension takes place, of course, the necessity of coordinating with similar policies in other countries through the creation of a climate club or through any way of collaboration could become even more important because of course, most of the trading partners of the EU would be impacted. And finally, one topic that was really important from my perspective is the compatibility with the CBDR principle, which is, as I said, the common but differentiated responsibilities principle. Because most of the least developed countries, when talking about the CBAM, were highlighting the fact that these policies should not just shift the burden of the decarbonization and ecological transition on the shoulders of them and relieve the EU from the effort of decarbonizing the economy. And of course, at the moment in the CBAM, there are no exemptions for any country at all. So any country is subject to the same regulation. And therefore, what I was suggesting and what some EU member of parliaments were suggesting when discussing the CBAM was the possibility of using parts of the revenues that the CBAM is able to generate and will be able to generate to support the energy and ecological transition in the least developed countries. So this way we would be able to harness to benefit from the implementation of this policy while keeping in mind the climate justice principles and the common but differentiated responsibilities principle. This discussion is still ongoing, and there are a few amendments in the European Parliament that will be discussed in the future to understand if parts of the revenues could be dedicated to similar projects. A final update that I would share with regards to the CBAM, and I think most of you might be aware of it, is that in the European Commission at the moment, there's a discussion about changing the structure of the CBAM, and more specifically, basically changing the threshold under which a company will be subject, a company's commercial flows will be subject to the CBAM. At the moment, the regulation was defining a threshold of $150 for the product value. So below that value, the CBAM will not apply. And now the new information that are available suggests that probably this threshold will be increased, and basically 80% of the companies that would have been subject to the CBAM will not be subject to the CBAM anymore. The EU Commission said that only 20% of them will still be subject to the CBAM, even though, and that's the information that we get from the European Commission, they say that 99% of the CO2 emissions will still be covered by the CBAM. So their goal should be just to remove the regulation from the smaller and medium-sized companies and keep the regulation only for big importers of goods and products from the rest of the world. So of course, this discussion around CBAM is still really important from my perspective. It's important to understand the impacts on the European trading partners, and probably there will be important news in the next month that will come up. So I hope to be able to also keep the results of my work up to date with what the new regulations will look like in the future. And then, yeah, I have a few papers that might be interesting if someone wants to analyze a little bit more into details the economic effects of the CBAM. And I think that's all from my side. So thank you for listening to the presentation, and I hope it was interesting for you.
Thank you, Luca. So you were extremely precise and technical, and right in time. So thank you. If there are any questions about it, I also see in chat, Gennaro, your question. I will write back answer to you in chat. Then if there are any questions about the theme.
If anybody has a question, I have one request of clarification to Luca. When you mention Korea, you say lowest value of diversification. Can you say something, articulate a little bit more this concept, please?
Yeah. So basically, the trade diversification that I was measuring in my work compared basically what share of the Korean exports in this case towards Europe fall under the CBAM regulation. So if that share is basically a high percentage of the products that the Korea exports towards European Union fall under the CBAM umbrella, of course for them it would be harder to comply or like to adjust to the new regulation, and if it's lower it's going to be easier. Of course these are relative values, so we are comparing the trade diversification relatively across the countries that are studied under the in my study. So basically a high value means that their diversification share is higher compared to the other countries. Might not be high in absolute value, in absolute terms. It was like a relative analysis compared to the other observations in the study.
Thank you.
There are any questions about the topic?
I found very interesting the study of Luca because really the perspective to see in terms of the risk for the countries is very interesting in terms of production, but even in terms of capacity to produce renewable energy, to be effective in terms of reduction of the carbon embedded in the products. So I see a lot of interesting point. At the same time, you mentioned, look at the end, the very critical aspect of the common but differentiated responsibility, the CPDR principle. And this is a key point, because we know we want to push from Europe to other countries externally to engage them in the same trajectory of decarbonization. At the same time, we are fully aware that in UNFCCC concept, we are developed countries, and developing countries are in different level of maturity, and the climate justice or the CBDR principle, to be more precise, is a key one, because we want to do something from them. At the same time, we know that we need to support them. And you mentioned your presentation, so I don't want to add anything more, but I believe this is another very important key aspects of your study. This is not only to look in the perspective of the capacity or the risk of the country, but even in terms of what we can expect from them and what they should expect from us. And we also have a representative of other country, not European country here, if you want to comment, or if some other colleagues want to add something, comment.
Daniele?
Johan and Patton. So we have Korea and Thailand. So Johan first, please.
Okay. Thank you, Daniele, and thank you, Luca. And I'm sorry I'm a little late here, so I just have the last parts. And so I just have some wonderings. If you have any ideas, please let me know, because at the very first time this European CBAM is introduced, many people in Korea think and thought that it will be the CBAM would adopt PEF as a methodology. However, lately it was not. And still in Korea, many experts expect that this CBAM will be evolved to use PEF things, and it will be much more harder than before for Korean exporting companies. Actually, nobody can say for now. However, if you have any impression, because you studied the impact on Asian country, like I think Japan, Korea is relatively well prepared for the things. So I want to know, do you have any idea this methodology could be evolved to the PEF methodology or not? This is first question. And if it is happened in that case, like Korea or Japan, or there is underdeveloping countries, there might be a different pressure will be given. So this kind of methodology change could affect what kind of the pressure difference. Okay, thank you.
I don't know, Luca, maybe this is a point more to my side, because I don't think your methodology went the direction of your study about the methodology. And I had a conversation with Johan several times about the CBAM implication for Korea. And unfortunately, on my knowledge, Johan, there is not any kind of change in terms of the quantification methodology. But I also say that in this moment there is an open discussion at the IAF level, International Accreditation Force. So it means the organization collecting all the accreditation body around the world, if it's possible to use some ISO standard for this quantification, because there is a study from Germany that want to take into consideration the possibility to use ISO 14067, but in my view, this is only a desire, because if you look from the European Commission perspective, in this moment there is not any kind of flexibility to open another direction. So unfortunately, I need to underline, unfortunately, and in this moment we don't have this kind of flexibility that could be very appreciated from non-European country where they use other methodology. Yeah.
Okay.
And Pato, you also take you on. You ask for the question. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Luca, for excellent presentation and the study. I hope this study could help us a lot. And maybe the first thing that I like to know about this study is what should be the next step of your study. because you have some recommendations. So the next step, could it create any impact and help to create more positive impact for your study in the future. And the second point is like I like to share with you that from the point of our country, when we talk about CBAM, we concern 2 points. First is the cost from the CBAM certificate. The second point is the verification cost that may be for the company in Thailand if they use the accredited verifier from EU recommendation, maybe could cost a lot, and maybe they're very concerned in this point. So as Daniel mentioned earlier, if the standard is fixed and the regulation is open to all accredited verifier under the IAF protocol, it should help. This should help many countries around the world if this case is open. So if it's possible, I think a lot of countries recommend to EU that to open for the accredited verifier that under the accreditation body with in line with the IAF rule. So back to the study. Did your study include the impact for the verifications cost to interpret the impact or not?
Thank you, Patam, for your question. And no, I didn't include verification costs in my study, so that's something that I would like to work in the future. In case I would also, back to your first question in terms of how I would like to improve it or how it would be carried forward. I think of course it was like a master thesis work, so there's a lot of room for improvement from an environmental economic perspective. For example, computing the risk for countries through a relative risk index is something that can be easier than using CGE models, but I think a better estimate of which of the economic impact on those countries would be available if I would be able to use CGE, like computable general equilibrium models. And that's something that, for example, I wanted to explore in an extension of my study, and also being able to retrieve more precise data on not only the energy, like as you saw in the study, I was using basically the primary, the source, the renewable energy share in primary energy as the main variable to compute the CO2 intensity of the energy mix. But a better estimate of the impact would be available if I had data related to how those products under the CBAM regulations are produced in each country, and what's the energy in the CO2 intensity of the production of those specific products, not in general for the electricity mix of the country. So that was, I didn't have those data, and it was not easy to retrieve them, but in the future I would like to be able to compute exactly the CO2 intensity of the production of steel, iron, aluminum, fertilizers, and the other products for each country. I hope I answered your question.
Excellent answer. Thank you so much, Luca.
And Patam, I link to the other part of your question, the one in connection with the verifications more in my area. As you know, I'm quite against the approach of the European Commission. We also discussed several times to strict the verification accreditation process under the EU umbrella, not only in terms of fairness and the justice and the balanced approach, but even in terms of effectiveness. So I don't believe that at the end of the story, this kind of approach will be effective. And at the same time, we had the side event at the COP28 in Sharm el-Sheikh 2 years ago, where it was organized by European Commission with the participation of IAF, the International Accreditation Forum mentioned before, where there was a clear request now to be more flexible. And so far, I don't see any kind of flexibility. What we see at this moment is verification body based in Asia, for example, asking to be accredited in Europe, or asking to develop a cooperation with the European verification bodies. So at the end of the story, something go out from the door and come back from the windows, no? Is the really not more transparent approach, in my view, to open to the engagement of other verification bodies, even because we have a multilateral agreement at the international level. So we have some system to control if everything is performed correctly in different countries. So let me say, we need to work, we need to continue to focus, to make pressure to European Commission to have a system that will be reliable in terms to guarantee the 1 ton of CO2 is 1 ton of CO2, but to be even flexible, not only in terms of the system, but in terms of cost. Because if you go in Vietnam and Cambodia, you cannot apply the European Union cost for verification. And this is really an important point. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Daniel. I agree with you and support your idea.
We can also moving on to the end of this webinar. So I would like to thank you, everyone who comes. Thank for your attention and for sharing your interest. Thank Luca, of course. Thank Daniele and also Lucia. And we are looking to see you again, of course, in our forum, as Daniele said before, T-Corner seminars, that you can check this out through our newsletter. So thank you again and have a nice day.